Welcome to Hometown Heroes. I'm Rick Irving with my co-host Mary Staffel. And Mary and I are so excited today because we have discovered a lovely group of women who served our country and served our service men and women in Vietnam, known as the Red Cross Donut Dollies. So welcome to the Hometown Heroes.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's an honor to be here.
No, we're excited. This is something that I really have so little knowledge of, so I'm excited to hear y'all's story.
Good.
And for the people that don't know, during the Vietnam War, there were 627 women that went with the Red Cross, and some of them went for more than one term. I think all had to be college educated, and you just brought America and smiles and comfort to our servicemen and women. So if you just each introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you and where you're from and when you served.
I'm Betsy from Highlands Ranch, Colorado. I was in Vietnam September 68 to September 69.
And I'm Ellen, and I currently live in Conway, South Carolina, but was from Georgia. And I served from 1970 to 1971, and I was in Bien Hoa and Da Nang and Long Binh.
My name is Joyce. I was in Vietnam from 70 to 71. I served in Da Nang and also Cam Ranh Air. And Sue and I and Ellen actually served together in the same unit over 50 years ago.
That's right. Hard to believe in today. Yes.
Over 55 years ago now.
Yes, well, I wasn't going to put that in. But.
I'm Sue, and I'm from Cincinnati, from Ohio, and was there in 69 to 70 in Cam Ranh Army, and then Phan Rang Air Base, and then Da Nang, which is where we all connected. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of places that a lot of our Vietnam guys were, so there may be some crossed paths here.
Oh, I'm sure there are. Yeah, and in addition to those assignments, we all went TDY someplace, and then we flew out by helicopter to many fire bases.
You spent a lot of time on helicopters, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And you didn't have battle fatigues and combat boots. You had powder blue dresses, didn't you?
We
Yes,
did.
we did,
And,
yes.
And little tennis shoes and good bladders.
So tell us a little bit about the history of the Red Cross Donut Dollies, because it didn't just start in Vietnam. It started long before that, didn't it?
Yes, in World War II, they started in England learning how to make donuts in a modified bus. And then they got 2.5-ton trucks that they put a donut machine and a coffee making machine and 3 beds for the 3 women that were assigned to that truck. Those trucks followed shortly after the landing in Normandy. Those women went overseas and stayed with the program for the duration of World War II, once they got from 43 till the war ended in 45. Then after the armistice in Korea in 1953, General Westmoreland said he wanted Red Cross to come into Korea, in South Korea, to do the same kind of thing. They had donuts in South Korea, but the Korean bakers made the donuts. And that program went from 1953 to 1973. Wow. Then when Westmoreland ended up in Vietnam, he said, well, I need the Red Cross people to come to Vietnam also. So that in 1965, they opened the first units there, and the last unit closed in spring of 1972. We didn't officially have donuts, but if you talk to various we women, mess sergeants would make the mess sergeants would make donuts periodically and say, here, have some donuts, or take some donuts out when you go to a forward base. I never saw a donut in Vietnam, but to say we never had donuts in Vietnam is not really true.
but we lovingly attach ourselves to that donut dolly phrase, and we're proud of it.
Because our work was not in the hospitals, it was morale. And we were supplemental to the Army Special Services. So we had service centers in the larger places, excuse me, like Cameron or Da Nang. But then when there were a lot of people that were not near a large base. And so then we would go out, as we were saying, 2 by 2 in helicopters and trucks and jeeps and however we could get there. And they'd call ahead. And if there was no incoming, then we would follow our route of 6 to 8 stops for an hour. And the men would get off work and come, and we would sit around sandbags or whatever for a program that we would create. So it was a kind of an oasis of morale, we hoped, and comfort and connection with home.
So, for example, out of Da Nang, we might travel by helicopter maybe 2 hours to get to a very, very remote fire base. And oftentimes, the guys would be so surprised. They wouldn't know we were coming. On the other hand, sometimes they did. In fact, I heard the story of one time one of the ladies was flying into the fire base, and up comes a flag, and there's 2 round eyes printed on this flag, and it says, "Welcome, Round Eyes." Of course, it was underneath the U.S. flag, but we would go to remote fire bases, and since you brought that up, I just happened to have, I had been in country for about 2 weeks, and I went out to my first fire base call, and I think it was Barbara, somebody I was with, and we were on top of this fire base out in the middle of nowhere, and so they started having incoming, and the guys grabbed us and took us to the bunker, and on the way to the bunker, I fell and scratched up my shin, and so the next Monday at our regular meeting, our unit director, Ellen, gave me a
Purple Heart.
I was presented with my Purple Heart that I earned in Vietnam.
Oh, that's priceless.
Do you remember that?
No. But I don't doubt it.
You don't remember
that? Red Cross centers, and in Da Nang was a large center, and we also had in Benoit where I was. But we did serve coffee there now. We served coffee and Kool-Aid, and the mess hall would bring over coffee cake or a version thereof. And so the guys would drink coffee, and we'd have that there all day long, the Kool-Aid and the coffee. And I remember a couple of times when they made donuts, and I don't remember where I was. Of course, they weren't glazed. They were just really just brown with holes in them, and they weren't good at all. But we did literally have them once in a great while. But I guess the excitement of having them with us was they would eat them no matter what.
Yeah. So when we would go out to these Club Mobile, what we call Club Mobile runs by helicopter, we would take this big bag. I don't remember what it was, a maps bag, I believe, to carry large maps, canvas. And that we got from ring canvas. And the ideal was that you would put on a program that would involve that group of men. And these programs we would make those programs up without a computer and very little resources. But we were so creative, feeding on each other and so forth. And the whole idea behind that was we came to the fire base. We knew that we wouldn't be able to shake everybody's hands or to even talk with everyone. But by utilizing this game idea, we were able to make that eye contact to say, yeah, you got the right answer. Yeah, come on up. Or in many cases, they would run the answer up to us. And so for that hour that we were there, all of a sudden, in looking at us, they were seeing their sister back home or their girlfriend. And in many cases, their mother, because it was a feminine image that they had. And they were reminded at that time of the people at home who loved and cared for them. So we literally brought a touch of home to that combat zone.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We would start out our program by saying who we were, like I'm Ellen and I'm from Georgia, And then the first question was, what in the world would make you come over here?
You.
Or they would want to know where in the world you were from, because everything was about the world, back in the
Yeah.
world. And so that was always funny. And, many times some of them were from the same places that we were, or close enough. And so that brought a connection as well.
And some of the games you played, I've watched some documentaries, and one of them was a frog race where they'd catch frogs and have a frog race, and then they had cockroach races. So
Oh no.
Yep.
you just had to be creative because you didn't have computers and all that.
We were talking
Anything
about
you
that
can
at
do
breakfast
for-
this morning, that how creative we were. The only thing we had was Britannica encyclopedias and just nothing else. So how we came up with all of this, we would have a program about football or baseball or basketball or cars or
Hunting and
movies
fishing.
and no way to research that, and look up who the actors were and any of that. So, but when we did do our programming, made our programs in the centers, we could try those programs out on the men in the center, and they would help us put the questions together, or we would work with them and about the questions and answers. And so they were very, very helpful.
It always amazed me too, no matter where you were or what the group was, somebody knew the answer to one of the
Yeah, that's true.
pre-trivial pursuits or Jeopardy kind of.
Concentration or whatever.
Yeah, they were usually, it was a game. You divide them into two groups, so there was a little bit of competition. So the focus wasn't as much on us as it was on winning the
Right.
game.
Right.
But someone would know the answer to almost everything factual that you could come up with.
And
But
while you
as
were,
you said, the military, the guys would help a lot with the sometimes
yeah.
with the props, with the you get a guy who could draw cartoons, and he'd be a great help.
while your day would start early, like 6 o'clock until 6 o'clock, or did you kind of have regular trips where you'd be out 12 hours and come back, or sometimes you might get caught someplace and not be able to get back the same day?
There were a
Well, yes.
couple of times people had to spend the night at a forward fire base. It
They got
wasn't.
sucked in. Mhm.
Yeah, the weather got socked in, or just sometimes it could have been lack of transportation.
happened
Helicopters
to
were
you,
all busy
didn't it,
supporting
No,
the troops.
no,
Yeah.
but
It
I
just
did talk to.
depended. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It depended. Some of the program runs that we had were on the rear bases, and so those were regular hours. You would be at, you would start at like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning and go to like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But when you flew out to the fire bases is when, depending on how long it took you to get there, and you would stay there almost an hour, and so you would leave, be ready. You would be Army ready, as they say, and you would just sit and wait. And so then the helicopter would come pick you up, and then you would go. Sometimes we would have a helicopter assigned to us for the day, and other times we would have a drop off, and they would call somebody else in the area, and they would come pick us up. So it just depended. And so if you didn't have a helicopter assigned to you for the day per se, you would have to wait until somebody could pick you up and take you to the next fire base. So that made the day like a 12-hour day, or more.
Right. Lots of those. And when we would go to the fire bases, we would get pretty grungy because you couldn't lean against anything that didn't have red dust on it.
Red mud, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
red
mud in the rainy
mud and
season.
so
Oh
forth.
gosh.
But no matter how dingy that we looked, we still looked good to those guys, and we appreciated the fact that we did, or we thought we did.
And so whenever you go out, you wouldn't take a sack lunch. You'd eat with them and eat sea rations if they were eating sea rations, or
Lerp rations.
If that's all was available, we would. But in most cases, there was some kind of mess hall.
Yeah.
But what we would do would talk sometimes with the cooks and ask them if we could serve. And so the guys would be outside waiting to come in, and we would be on the line ready to serve the SOS. and those guys would come up, and all of a sudden there was a round eye. There was a donut dolly. There was a Red Cross girl, and they would be so surprised. So we always enjoyed that opportunity.
Somebody-
Some of the forward fire bases, they would deliver a hot meal for the middle of the day. And
Whoa.
otherwise, the guys were existing on sea rations for breakfast and dinner, but they get one good hot meal a day.
Yeah.
If there were no mess hall out in the middle of nowhere.
Do you remember the Charlie Ration cookbook? How you make sea
Oh.
rations into a decent meal?
Oh,
Talk about Christmas.
imagine. Ah,
Sue mentioned
I'd like to ask each one of you a question. You know, you were all young women right out of college, and here you're going on this adventure. There wasn't the internet to search to find out what things were going on over there or what to take or anything. But whenever you were going over there and landed, what was going through your mind? You have, of course, the unknown, but were you scared? Was there some fear there, or how did you feel whenever you got to Vietnam?
We didn't know to be scared.
I think we were too naive in a way to really understand how dangerous
The gravity of
it could have been. Everybody, all of us had service in mind. We wanted to go serve the men who had no choice to go. And so, it was a great adventure as far as we were concerned. And with
I think we all probably had.
units,
Go ahead.
yeah, it was amazing. I didn't know Ellen in Vietnam. I met Ellen 40 years after Vietnam, but we have the bond. I know exactly what she went through. She knows exactly what I went through, and
Right.
we're just, you become instant
Sisters.
friends with
Sisters,
everybody.
we're sisters.
It is a sisterhood. Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
But
That
there's no
lasted
doubt we all felt fear. We were, like we said, just out of college. We were single. We were going on this great adventure that we all volunteered to do. We got paid a minimal salary, but I can
We got room and board, however.
I can very well remember the flight from San Francisco to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And there were soldiers on that flight as well.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
even when I landed in Salt Lake City and I looked down at the airport, I thought it came back to me. I guess because I was going to this Red Cross get together, but I still see myself flying into that into Saigon, and the lights and the bombs exploding, off in the distance. So sure, we were scared. We were just as scared as those young soldiers were that were on that same flight with us. We knew we didn't have any idea what we were getting ourselves into.
When we flew into Tonsanut, and so the guys were on the plane. Of course, there's many more of them. There were, I think, 20 of us that flew in together, or were in our class. Maybe not all of us went there, and some of them were still going to Korea. And some of the guys had their guitars, and we sang, and we were talking and laughing and whatever. And then the pilot came on and says, "We're starting our descent into Saigon." You could have heard a pin drop. It was just there was dead silence from then on until
that's
we landed.
similar to what we heard from BJ Pryor, right? Because she was a flight attendant on those flights. So one of our members, she would tell those same stories of how the planes would be decorated and the people would be singing, and then she tells the story of how it was coming back. So I'll be curious as Rick continues to have you guys share stories, how many similarities there are with what BJ talks about and what the guys talk about.
Mm-hmm.
That flight back to the world, they called it.
Yeah.
Some people would
The
get off.
interesting part for us that we went to Vietnam as our training class group. We had 2 weeks in DC to train.
2 weeks.
We came home.
Peace.
2 weeks. But we came home more independently than we had gone over, because some people would take R&R on their way home. I did a week in Japan on the way home. So we were much smaller groups, and I assume there were some individuals that came home. A couple of girls went to Australia and got jobs teaching so they could stay out of the country 2 years and or 18 months and not pay any income tax on their $5,000 pay.
Smart.
And one of them actually married an Australian and still lives there, and she'll be at this convention.
Yeah.
She'll be here this afternoon. When I went back to Vietnam 13 years ago, and we also went to Australia and we saw Evelyn and she and her husband there. But I did go back 13 years ago.
How many of you have been back to Vietnam?
Just Ellen, I guess.
Just Ellen?
Oh, you know,
Our
of us.
brave one.
Out of the four of us, I'm the only one. But there's
Okay.
There've been several. I know of some that went back and worked on some orphanage projects, building orphanages and so forth.
Wow.
Do
And
you
there-
still serve today? I mean, are you with organizations where you volunteer or?
You know, it's amazing. If you were to take these 54 people, or I don't know how many actual donut dollies are here today, but if you look at, I would say 98% of those of us who are here today have still serve in some capacity.
I'm sure of it.
Volunteer in our communities. I know I do. Sue, and it's just ingrained in you. And we all are pretty much successful people too. We did a little study at one time, and it was amazing the paths that we all chose and the success rate.
Well, one of the things that we were talking about at breakfast this morning was that the spirit was, when you're asked to do something, we never thought we can't. It was always, yep, we can do it.
It wasn't in our vocabulary. And today we did the same thing.
That's right.
Yes, and I think it follows through today. Yes,
We managed
It
to pull
does.
this recording together on a moment's notice.
Yeah. I mean, we adapt, and we did.
Yeah.
We adapted.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to be very flexible and be able to adapt because you didn't know from one day to the other sometime what was going to happen or what the circumstances might be. But you had to go wherever you were going. You had to go there and have a smile on your face, and whatever your problems were,
They were out the window.
yeah.
And an open heart, I would say, because you're right. Sometimes there were guys who needed to talk and we didn't have a lot of time, but sometimes we would visit hospitals and have a chance to speak with people then. And then sometimes there were difficult things to face. And I think Joyce said something yesterday that when she meets somebody that served in Vietnam, she thanks them for their service. And then if a conversation ensues, she asks where they served. And then she says, I work for the Red Cross and we were there for you.
With you.
We were there with you. We were there with you.
With you.
Yeah. That's the key. I
And
think that
wow,
was
what a
the point.
conversation then ensues. In most cases, a big hug and sometimes tears, But it's so meaningful for me today when I meet any Vietnam veteran and we connect. So we still appreciate any veteran, but of course the Vietnam veterans are so close to our hearts. And the thing is, we might have wore those little blue, they wore these combat boots. And I think in some cases, some of the Red Cross girls early on were issued combat boots.
I didn't know that.
And we wore, as well as uniforms, I think, the early ones. But we wore these little blue tennis shoes. And the thing is, our little blue tennis shoes have walked in some of the same places as those boots. And that is that connection that we have with them today,
Wow.
Joyce and Sue are wearing the top of a culotte, a two-piece culotte. It's that same material. It's like a pinstripe, blue and white. We had the culottes and then we had the single dresses.
And we preferred the culottes because when the helicopters were coming in to pick us up, they would always, or drop us off mainly, when they would came in to drop us off, they would take off the helicopter too soon and it would blow the dresses up over our head.
Yeah.
You don't think that was intentional, do you, Joyce?
No, never.
I was a flight medic on a UE, and I tell this story sometime. But the new guys, whenever we're out flying around on missions and stuff, whenever you need to go to the bathroom, we just land in a field, and the guy get out and go to the bathroom. But you could tell the new guys because they wouldn't go real far from the helicopter. They'd be where the wash of the blade was. And about the time they started going to the bathroom,
Oh
Yeah.
they
no.
changed the pitch of the blade and all that had come right back on you. So
Oh,
so those pilots knew how to blow those dresses up. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Well, you know, during the day we tried not to drink anything at all. And, you know,
Right.
every base that you'd go to, and you'd go to the remote bases, they would want to give you a Coca-Cola or whatever it is, and they'd roll it on some ice or whatever. And you would think, you're thinking like, no, don't waste that Coke. I mean, so you put it up to your mouth and you might take a sip, but that's it. Because you knew
Yeah.
you couldn't drink that. So, and it would just
I was
be
on-
like, oh, let us get you a Coke. And you're like, no,
No, thank you.
no. You know, we
I was on-
can't do that.
I was on a fire base one time, and they just had the outdoor toilets, and
Latrines enclosed or not?
outdoor toilets. Yeah, just outdoor toilets like you see.
Not latrines. Not,
No.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was a two-holer. And so I was sitting there, and this Papazan male Vietnamese came in and sat right next to me and did his thing while I was sitting there, It was really. And then there was another case where I was on a fire base, and they did not have any, they didn't have anything. And they just had this, like, I don't know, big piece of tin, and they, I guess, must squat behind that or something. And I could not hold it any longer. So I mentioned it to the guys, and they quickly ran and got a poncho and made me a little
Aw,
something to get
that's so
behind.
dear.
Because here I am, and with 100 guys, looking at me, and I squat down and do my thing. About that time, a helicopter comes over, and so I just give them a peace sign, But yeah, there were a lot of funny
Sometimes
stories.
we'd fly in, and they were sitting on the, whatever, and we were waving to them.
Yeah.
And I was just, you just had to go with it,
Yeah, and they would sometimes fly over. I remember some of the ladies here telling about they would put their underwear and bras out on a clothesline, and there were people, and the GS would fly over those and make circles around. It's
Yeah. It's fun. Yeah.
That's called a touch
So-
of home.
a touch of home. Anyway, yeah, that was literally
it's hard being a woman in those situations.
Yeah, you can relate to that.
I can relate to that. Yes.
Absolutely, you can relate to that.
Where did you
You
serve,
know-
Mary?
Well, I have a part 1 and a part 2. I served on active duty from 78 to 86. And most of that was either at Chanute Air Force Base or in Illinois or at the Air Force Academy in Colorado. Then I was out for almost 20 years, found out I could go back in. And so at the ripe old age of 45 in 2005, I went back in and
Oh my
finished another 15 years till I retired in 2020. I deployed when I was in, and I went to Germany, I went to Kuwait, I went to Qatar, and I went to Romania.
Oh my
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So in
A
many
lot of
ways,
experiences.
it has been said that because the Red Cross girls were some of the first women actively involved in a war zone like Vietnam, we kind of set opened the pathway for women.
Sure, absolutely.
In
Yeah,
other
it showed that women could be in the AOR and the area of responsibility and could handle themselves. We might have some things we have to work through, especially if you're a little more modest. So you work through those things, but you quickly learn that modesty just goes out the window.
It does.
Out the
Absolutely.
Kristen Hanna has this book out called The Women, and it's been very popular, and several of us have been invited into groups to speak of it. It's about the women nurses who served in Vietnam. But I think before you came, Mary, we mentioned this book called Goodnight Irene, which is a historical novel that Alberto Urrea wrote about his mother's experience in World War II, being a clubmobile donut
Red Cross,
dolly. Red Cross, yeah.
It's very good if you ever get a chance to
Wow,
read it.
very cool.
Sue was talking about, and about sometimes when we were in the recreation centers, the guys would come in and you would, especially if they came in, were able to come in very often, you got to know them pretty well.
Yeah.
And they might come in on just a certain day. And then one day that Tuesday would come and they didn't make it. You would see their buddy and they would explain that he was gone, you know.
Yeah.
So some of that was hard to take, and we had no training, and I guess no one has any training to take the word of death or understand the word of death. But at that time, we became very close to that war, and our jobs were at the recreation centers, especially many times, were just to listen and not say a word, because that guy needed to talk. That guy just needed someone to listen because he wasn't going to talk to his buddy about his feelings in most cases,
or his Dear John letter.
Or his Dear John letter, yeah. So even though we had no training in counseling for the most part, we did just a lot of listening in the form of counseling.
That's the open-hearted part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the most important part. They didn't need anybody to solve anything for them. They just needed somebody that wasn't judging and wasn't gonna go and tell their story, but just somebody who was going to be there to listen. And that mattered probably more than anything else. And you guys probably didn't get any of the support when you got home for all the trauma that you experienced either.
Right.
Because they didn't probably think about, well, not that they thought about after Vietnam worrying about PTSD anyway, but you guys were exposed to a lot of the same stuff. You were exposed to the same chemicals, you were exposed to the same, all the toxins, all the environmental factors. You were exposed to all kinds of stuff, just like the soldiers were, and probably nobody ever thought to say, hey, have we looked at these folks to take care of them too?
Right.
Yeah.
You're
When
right.
I came back, I got a job in Atlanta, Georgia, at my alma mater, and we ended up renting an antebellum mansion, two Vietnam Red Cross and one who had gone to Korea. And then we had a medic who had been in Vietnam that we had met earlier.
Ooh.
After we came back. We called it our halfway house. And everybody wanted to come through Atlanta. So we had a stream of people coming through. They'd stay with us. They'd sleep on the floor. We'd go to underground Atlanta. But that helped us in our recovery, I think, to be able to be with other people who had experienced the same things. And to this day, 55 years later, we're still doing that.
Yeah.
You are. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the purpose of the roll call lunches is. So that when we bring these folks together, and we have a room of 450 to 500 people, and the biggest number of them are Vietnam veterans.
Mm-hmm.
But we bring them together and they get to sit at a table with other people that they can talk to about their service or not. And they can talk about whatever they want to talk about.
Yeah.
And they're just, that we intentionally have round tables because round tables are conducive to conversation. Rectangular ones are not.
Mm-hmm.
But you do the round tables and you let them sit together, share a meal, and things just start to happen. And like people show up for an 11:30 luncheon, they start showing up at 9:30 in the morning, and people don't. They don't, and it's just because they need that time. This is their once a month. They're going to go see their buddies, and even if they don't talk about their experiences in the war or in their military service, they're there with people who they know understand, and they don't probably have to say a word.
That's absolutely right. We
And
find
that's all provided. Yeah,
That's fabulous. What great
yeah,
ministry, frankly. What a great offering for people. How healing.
yeah.
What we find too is that a lot of them never have told their story, but when they start hearing other veterans tell their story, then they start opening up. And then their family members, after those older ones pass away, their family members tell us, that roll call luncheon was the highlight of their month.
Wow. What a great service you're doing. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, so it's wonderful.
Mhm, mhm.
Mary, can you
anything
be president for a long time?
Well, I've been with Roll Call since 2017. It started in 2014 with one guy and a vision of taking some World War II vets to lunch and letting them share stories. And in 2017, when I joined, we probably had 400 or 500 folks on our roster. And I was the secretary when I came in the organization. Then I was a vice president, and I'm in my 5th year as the president. We have over 1,700 people on our roster, and we do a lunch we went from about 150, 200, maybe 250 up to now. We max out at 500. And when we open the reservation system, we're sold out in 3 or 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it's
That is
free.
so
It doesn't cost a veteran anything. So I say sold out, but it's sold out.
filled up?
We filled up the seats, right?
Thank you.
How wonderful.
Yeah,
How
that is
gratifying.
wonderful.
Certainly, if y'all are ever in town when we have a luncheon, man, we'd love to have you come.
What
And,
town is it?
Fort Worth.
We do it in Fort Worth, and we do it usually the 4th Friday of the month. There's a couple of exceptions to that because of holidays and such, but usually it's the 4th Friday of the month in Southwest Fort Worth. And we're very blessed that the churches have been. So we usually do it at Birchman Baptist Church, but they've been renovating. So we've been at Willow Park Baptist Church. In August, we should be back to Birchman. And neither church has charged us for the facility. So we just raise money to cover the cost of the food and, tablecloths and not, because the person who does the food insists that we have to have cloth tablecloths and it has to be done right. Right.
Yes.
So
That is wonderful that it's, done.
Yeah. It's a very
special,
nice
yes.
event with
Yes.
good food. And then we have a speaker. And so certainly would love to have you ladies anytime we could get you. We'd love to make that happen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. That would be really a privilege. That would be so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we're doing, only we only do it once a year.
Yeah, a lot of people do events once a year and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so much. And we go, we do it every month.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, we got it down to a science.
Ellen, you were in charge of the group in your area. Is that?
Yes.
Unit director she was.
Unit director at Denang and then at Long Bend, yes.
And how many women would you have at one time?
Denang had 12 women, and it was one of the larger groups because we had a center and we had the Club Mobile. And Club Mobile, there were large bases there, so there was a lot that went in the large bases and also in the fire bases, the remote fire bases. We also flew when we were there to the northern part, Quan Tri, and I served Thanksgiving dinner at the northernmost point fire base, and that probably was one of my best experiences was being there. And it's hot in Vietnam, but during monsoon season in the mountains, it's not hot. So we wore flak jackets and plus it was muddy. But that was a wonderful experience and being as far north as you could be, at the DMZ. Later, they made another unit there. I think there'd been one earlier at that time and then there. And I think Cameron, did you have 12 women, Joyce and Cameron?
No, we had 8.
Okay, so I think that Denang was the largest unit.
It was the largest.
Yeah.
And
we
Long
had
Bend.
a huge clubhouse. So center. So
we
needed 4. We needed 4 women in there at all times. So then the other 6 were out.
Okay. And what was the best part about being a unit director and the worst part about being a UD? What were some of the highlights of the
Easy on the worst parts.
Wow, put me on the spot here.
Well, Rick was going to ask that anyway. I could tell he was about to ask it.
Well, it was an honor to do it, for one thing. I came in as a program director and then was promoted to the unit director. So it was an honor that somebody thought that I had enough leadership ability to do that. But I mean, it was wonderful to get close to that many women, to the 12 women, and keep up with them. And you have some problems with everything that you do, so there were problem times too. So but the great times outnumbered that. I think because we had such a large unit, we had so many. You had like 12 creative minds working together, so we were able to do some great things. We had orphanage, we had parties, orphan parties, and we had all kinds of different activities at the center that you might not be able to do at some of the others, because we had, we had a music room, we had a little library, and we had a writing room, and we had a big rec room that had pool tables and foosball tables and ping pong and all of those things. And so, I mean, it was a really large center there.
And a Mars radio.
Yes. So, I mean, it was a great opportunity to get to know, people. Now, fortunately, don't ask them what they thought.
Women or the men?
No, the girls.
It was kind of like being a dorm mother, wasn't it?
On the spot.
Speaking of Red Cross
Center, I was in two purely clubmobile units, one in the Delta with 9th Infantry at Dongtam, and then when 101st Airborne came up in I Corps, we lived with the nurses in Fubai, and then once they got the trailers into Camp Eagle, we moved in there. Camp Eagle is interesting because they decided straight on they would not have any Vietnamese come on base to do anything. Whereas Dong Tam, we lived in a house that had been built, and we had a mama san come in, clean the house, do our laundry and those kind of things. But up in Camp Eagle, we were totally on our own. So we were traveling 5 days a week. You had an office day, and then Sunday we were off. In the office day, we had six women. We started with 4 women, went to 6. You had 6 weeks to come up with a brand new program, which ran for 6 weeks, and then you had to come up with another one. And the program director with the club mobiles did the scheduling so that you didn't inadvertently take the same program back to the same unit that had already done it.
So when I was the program director, when I first moved there, we had this giant board because you didn't want any of the same women to program together. You didn't want the programs to go out to the same thing. So you're trying to figure out 12 people, well, actually 6, because they're like teams of 2, that they didn't go with that person last time. They don't go to the same place. They don't do the same program before it was over with. So actually being the unit director was so much better because I didn't have to do that.
And that was before computers, so you really had to think.
Yes, absolutely. So, to research anything or to do anything, that was, so much better. But I mean, it was just, I loved the units that had the centers. I liked the center base and to do the club mobiling and to have the center. I was in 2 of those, and the my last time it was Long Been. I didn't like that as well. I just like being able to go into the center and speaking to everybody and talking to everybody, and so for me that was great. Everybody has their preference of what they like the best.
But the centers could have talent shows and
fashion shows. We had fashion shows.
Fashion shows, that's good.
Like we would get to go to Hong Kong. We had an R&R, or Australia. We would buy things and come back, and we would plan a fashion show. And that was we had to shut the doors down because we had so many people attending. And of course, no fashion show would be complete without one of the GIs dressing up like a donut dolly.
Right.
And so when I was in Da Nang, I had the opportunity to see the Bob Hope show. He was there.
Did you really?
I think maybe both of you were there.
I did too. Yes,
I was gone.
I was in.
So that was.
I saw it down in Dong Tam. Yeah.
Wow.
One of the Red Cross women got to go on the stage. Pat Owen got out. She had a cute short dress, and we gave Bob Hope a Red Cross pin to wear.
I have to tell you about that. I believe it was near Christmas. Yeah, Christmas. The Bob Hope Show came to Da Nang, and it was they had a lot of funny things going on. But at the very end of every show that he did, he would have the men sing Silent Night,
Really?
and he would not sing along with them. And in Da Nang, there was this big hill behind the stage, and it was as full as it possibly could have been. People came in from all of the surrounding fire bases, and these GIs started singing that song. And every time I hear it now,
Yeah. Chokes you up. Yeah.
I think that was probably the most meaningful Christmas I've ever had.
me too. The other thing we did at Christmas was we would dress up like Santa Claus, and this is not necessarily at every single base. And we would have our mothers or somebody send us the Red Cross, the Santa hats and all that, and then we would take this half melted ice cream out to these fire bases. We flew on C-123s and C-130s out to it was a caribou. It was a caribou.
The Santa Boos.
And they literally
and they painted the nose to look like Rudolph.
the red-nosed reindeer. And I ran into a guy recently when I was speaking who said, I know. I said, I was there. He said, I helped to paint one of the caribous. And he said that caribou barely made it legally because it had so many coats of paint on the nose of that caribou. And as far as the weight, I think, or something, displacement of air. And but what a neat opportunity that was. And then I know Evelyn talks about when they made up a Bob Hope program, and they would take, as a part of their programming, they took to the fire bases. There was I can't remember the names. There was Bob Hope, and then there was a golfer, and then there were the who was the most popular woman back then? Margaret. Anne Margaret. There was an Anne Margaret.
Okay, yes. And she was yeah.
Anyway, they would do a whole Bob Hope show. That was their show. They took out to the fire bases because those guys would come back into the area. So, and she's got some pictures of that. It's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I first came in country and I was in Benoit, we went to, I'm thinking Vung Tau, but I don't know where it was. Anyway, there was a naval ship there. And we went and we served, oh my gosh, it must have been 110 in the galley. And then we did a program on the side on the dock. And there was like 200 or whatever guys up there. And, we're just yelling, our programs, and they're all participating. You couldn't tell if they had the right answer, the wrong answer, or what they said. But anyway, that was also just a phenomenal experience. That was the only time I ever did that with the Navy.
And what was it about it? Was it they were people from all over that came, or just because it was right there by the boat and there were so many?
No, it's the men on the boat. The men on the ship.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't a boat, it was a ship.
Oh,
it was a lot of people.
Yeah, and sometimes it might be a very small group. Like you fly out to a fire base, there might be 15, I think. And then you go to another place, especially surrounding Da Nang area, and there might be 200.
Yeah.
And you just you get over your bashfulness very quickly and just get up there, and you're lost in that program with them and their expressions and their happiness and their smiles. And you're not bashful anymore. You get over it pretty quickly.
Well, and neither are they. I think that's part of the thing is that we did fun things and silly things and things that
on
you
purpose.
mightn't, right. And that, but creating that kind of, that opening
Diversion,
where people can do it together and nobody's embarrassed because you're just being together and having fun. And innocence to that, which is such contrast, of course, to the war situation. And I think that was part of, for me, what made it a little bit of an oasis. It was a certain kind of intimacy, even though it was, short. It was, I found it liberating. It created but I was raised on, you're supposed to Christian community. And what I found was that in Vietnam, in a war zone, the kind of community that I thought I'd been hearing about in church, I experienced in a war zone with all kinds of people. And I've never quite got over that. That changed me. It's like, you love your neighbor as yourself, and we're all siblings. And but what I finally got what they had been talking about in a war zone in Vietnam, and we were there. We were, guys would lay down their lives for their brothers. They did it. They were in the center the next day, and they were just that their buddy died, but they were alive because their buddy had given his life. And it's just like, it's like a crucible or a concentration of the essence of what it really means to be a human being there in an hour or in a year. I wouldn't trade that year for anything, even though it was very hard to return. And it took me 3 years to kind of figure out where my world legs again. But it was life-giving. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
You've seen things and had experiences that nobody else has got to experience, because you were there taking those men that were out fighting. You brought them out of that war for just an hour, but you made lasting memories for them too,
Right.
because I bet every one of them still remember the hour they spent with each one of you.
I have to share a story with you about that. I do a lot of speaking, and I was speaking to a large veterans group a few years ago. And after I had finished, I was packing up my things, and this man and his wife came running up to me. And he said, wait a minute before you go. He said, I want to thank you. And I said, well, thank you for serving. And he said, no, he says, I want to thank you for saving my life.
Wow.
And I said, no, I was not a nurse. And he said, no, I know you weren't a nurse. And he said, it wasn't you. But he said, I had been out on a fire base for over 6 months, a very remote, very bare fire base, had experienced the loss of my buddies, had experienced warfare, had experienced the going through a night, not even knowing whether to close my eyes. And he said, I couldn't take it anymore. They gave me a 2-day R&R to go to the rear area. And so he said he walked into a Red Cross center, and he said he had already decided before he walked into that Red Cross center that he was going to commit suicide while he was on that R&R. And he said, I walked into the Red Cross center, and one of the Red Cross girls walked up to me and said, hi, I'm Susan from Georgia, or whatever. I don't know who she was. I didn't know who she was. And he said, oh, I don't want to play any games or anything. And he said, I just want to sit down. And so she sat down with him, and she just listened. And he said she just continued to listen and to hear my story and to shake her head and to smile and comfort me. And he said, look at me. I'm here today because that Red Cross girl was there, and because that Red Cross girl took the time to listen. And he said, I have a wife. I have grandchildren. Thank you. Thank you for what you did. Mm-hmm. Boy, how could I ever have a better thank you for having served in Vietnam?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll bet you that story played itself out over and over and over. And if people could tell that story, I'll bet you guys would hear that hundreds of times. Because that really is what makes the difference. You talk about the 22 a day veterans that commit suicide that we work so hard to fight. It's because they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they have a purpose. They don't feel like anybody cares or wants to hear their story. And, even if they tell you it 50 times, let them tell you.
That's right.
Let them just tell you, there's people that will tell me the same thing over and over and over again. Every time I see them, I'm like, yeah, I'll pretend I never heard it before.
You could be a donut dolly.
I
could. It's not too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're over that. I'm sorry.
Y'all waited a long time before you really got recognized by the Department of Defense. and that was March the 29th, 2025, just a few months ago. And that's Vietnam Veterans Day. And in Washington, D.C., y'all finally got recognized, didn't you?
Yeah,
Betsy
we did.
was there.
Talk
Yeah,
about
this
that.
is a new documentary that's on YouTube that's come out this end of April. Anybody can pull it up on YouTube. The daughter
They-
of a couple that met in Vietnam, that I actually observed their romance growing. Her father got invited to an honor flight from Salt Lake City to DC. Her mother couldn't go because she wasn't a veteran, and they tried, and she just was not allowed to go. So since then, the daughter, who works for a production company in Virginia, decided the story needed to get out there more, and so she's.
Tell them the name of the video.
It's called The Donut Dollies, 627 women who also served in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And she did a wonderful job with it.
I've seen it. It's very, very good.
Yeah.
It's one of the best ones I've seen.
It really explains the program and the war, the time we were there, and with some Vietnam veterans were interviewed for this YouTube. So anybody can pull it up.
And I'll have that link to that in our description whenever
Okay.
we put it on YouTube, so
Good,
people can
thank
go
you.
there, because it's such a good documentary.
It is very good.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Wow.
we think so.
And of the 627, there were 3 that died in Vietnam, correct?
Correct. Yeah. None of them is a result of the war.
Combat, yeah.
Combat, yeah.
And then
There was
A
one
fourth
shot.
woman. Yeah, there was a fourth woman who, after Sharon Wesley, after her tour with the Red Cross, stayed and worked with the baby lift, and she was on the plane that crashed, and she died after with that one plane crash with the orphans.
and
And there
you've lost about 119, I think, in that documentary. Whenever I was watching it, I think it said that you've lost about 119 of the 627 donut dollies. So, and then at the end of the documentary, you have all their pictures, which is very
Yeah.
touching.
Well, a partial of those pictures. When you think about it, our average age is probably 78 or 79.
Yeah.
Usually at this point, 25% of the population has deceased. So we're pretty much on track with that.
We still act like we're all healthy when we get together. It's amazing how much
never
more
know.
energy we have. Yeah.
We're still 22 in our minds, right?
Yeah.
I know how that is.
Uh-huh.
But I think that's a lot to that, right? Because when you guys were all doing what you're talking, you're gathering to celebrate and commemorate what you did in Vietnam. And so it takes you back there. So it makes you feel like you're that age again. It's like you go to a high school reunion. You haven't seen those people in 25 years, but you all think it's 25 years ago. I think it's that same concept of
point.
now we're living what we did in the past by coming together. And I think that's pretty cool. But and so few of y'all to do such work that you did, and it was right for you to be recognized. And it's good that you finally were, because you served too. You just didn't pick up a gun. You were still serving.
Speaking of recognition, there's a House resolution that is being introduced. It's House Resolution 3592. And it was presented by Mikey Sherrill out of New Jersey. And it's actually a bill that proposes that the Donut Dollies be given the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest civilian honor that is available. And of course, we're all very excited about that. And of course, it has to make its way through many supporters and
It's a long process.
very much.
Yes.
But the
I
fact that the
think it
bills
has. I think it has a new number with this new Congress, but I don't know what it is.
3592.
Okay,
It's
that's a new number.
3592. Yes.
Okay.
So if anyone's listening, we would appreciate your support. You're contacting your congressman and asking them to support that.
And if you'll send me that information, then we'll help on our end to try to get the word out.
Thank
And
you.
one thing we'd like to extend to y'all is to over a period of time is to have some of you just individually be on our podcast so can really get to know you a lot better, find out, where you're born and how you became to the point of wanting to be a donut dolly, and then what happened in Vietnam and what happened afterwards, because, you had that 1 year or so in Vietnam, but then you had a lifetime after that. So,
Mhm.
And it forever, we left Vietnam, but Vietnam has never left us. And
that's right.
what we did there and what we experienced and how we grew there has affected our lives in so many ways since. So many
Mhm.
ways. That 1 little year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, our time's about up, and I'm going to end it with our friend Don Graves. He sings "God Bless America." So we just appreciate and are so honored to have each one of you on. And after it plays, if you'll just stay right where you are for a little bit, we'll come back and talk to you. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. This is an honor.
and
And thank you.
it's such an honor to have met and heard your stories today. So here's our friend Don Graves. Iwo Jima survivor Don Graves singing "God Bless America" on his 100th birthday.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above, from the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean. Why we're born. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, our home, sweet home. Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being a part of Hometown Heroes podcast. Visit our YouTube channel and subscribe today. We look forward to seeing you next week on Hometown Heroes, the voice of heroes, the voice for heroes.